You're listening to the Educate, Enable and Empower Show, a podcast from the Scottish Women's Development Forum, in which we sit down with inspiring women and others to listen to their stories, life lessons and perspectives. My name is Jenny Stewart, and I'm chair of the Scottish Women's Development Forum. In this podcast, Joanne McEwen and I sit down with Assistant Chief Constable Emma Bond. Welcome to Breaking Barriers, a special episode in honour of International Women's Day, where we're embracing the theme of inspiring inclusion and the UN call to invest in women and accelerate progress. Today, we're joined by Assistant Chief Constable Emma Bond, MBE. We'll be delving into ACC Bond's remarkable career, her insights on breaking barriers within policing, and her efforts to tackle sexism and misogyny. But first, let's introduce her. ACC, welcome. You are the Executive Lead for Local Policing North and Contact Command and Control. And you have quite an extensive portfolio, which consists of North East Division, Tayside, Highlands and Islands, Contact Command and Control, Public Confidence, volunteers, including the Police Scotland Youth Volunteers, Special Constables, Armed Forces Reservists, and Sex Equality and Tackling Misogyny. You have 23 years experience of policing in Northern Ireland, are an experienced Divisional Commander, Public Order Gold Commander, Strategic Firearms Commander, and Police Service of Northern Ireland's former Head of Innovation and Change. You were a founding member of their Women in Policing Association, former Head of Learning and Development and Executive Lead for Hate Crime. You were awarded an MBE for services to policing and the community in 2019. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
ACC, a fantastic bio that you've got there. Tell us what initially drew you into a career in policing.
Oh, it's dead easy. So I grew up in Northern Ireland within a policing family. So my dad was a police officer for 32 years. My mum was a radiographer. And being the typical people pleaser that I am, and despite being a very effective and competent police officer, the most indecisive person in the world. So I didn't know whenever I was at school what I really wanted to do. So I went to university and graduated in radiography. And then joined the police after I had graduated from university. And my sister had already joined the police 3 years prior to me doing it. So I think it was probably just growing up in that environment. There was a degree of excitement and buzz, and I think just everything that policing is that drew me to it. And I suppose also to the prospect of burying enemas for the rest of my days as a radiographer every Monday morning didn't really thrill me to the point that I could see myself. And I really loved, there's probably a degree of an analogy, because I really loved the excitement and the unpredictability of the emergency work within radiography, but it was the more routine stuff that I just thought, and actually that sadness, I think, even of seeing sick people all the time and being within quite a constrained environment, I just thought I probably could have done it and would have done it if I potentially hadn't have been successful as a career in policing. But I think it has just been in my blood from day one.
But you kept both your parents happy by following in both their
really
footsteps.
Guilty joining the police, actually, because my mum was so proud of me at the fact that I had studied radiography. And interestingly, the first week I was in my training within Garnerville in Northern Ireland, I got a phone call because I had been doing job interviews for radiography to say I was being offered a job in the Royal in Belfast, which is where my mum was a radiographer. And she rang me and says, "Emma, the phone to you and offered you the job. Do you want to accept it?" And I'd go, "Oh no, I don't." But yeah, but I've no regrets. Yeah. I've no regrets. So yeah, that's what drew me here.
So tell us about Northern Ireland, because you mentioned buzz there, a lot of change there over the years, but also from a policing perspective, must be a challenging role, challenging place to work at times.
Yeah, it's I loved my time in Northern Ireland. I mean, it's home for me. As much, I live in Scotland and I've made Scotland my home, but I think there's something about my mum and dad and my family, and it was a challenging environment. But to be fair, I think I'd lived up through it, so it was normal for me, as probably bizarre as that sounds. My dad checking under the car and all of those things that come, you not being able to tell people where you lived and living and probably why I'm such a strong introvert, because actually you lived quite an isolated sort of an upbringing just because of the nature of who we were and everything else. So, but you just get on with it. You know, you just accepted it was part of the role, the desire, I suppose, to be part. I just did continue to love policing. And I think just that sort of kept you going, and you can live a very normal life. I was really fortunate. I mean, I lived in a part of Northern Ireland that is probably relatively untouched. But, you were able to drive far enough out that you were relatively detached, and you're just sensible around what you do and circle of friends and various bits and pieces. But I've the experiences that I've had through my policing career, the mentors that I've had, the role models, that wider leadership, why I'm the police officer I am today has undoubtedly all been rooted in my policing journey in Northern Ireland. And I wouldn't be where I was, I suspect, if it hadn't been for it. When you reflect on it, actually, you read, application forms that you've done or things you've been called, or even listen to you introduce your bio. You just take so much of it for granted, and commanding major public order events. And, I've gone through the awful situation of receiving the phone call to say one of my officers has been given the last rites as a result of an attack by violent dissident Republicans. Thankfully survived, but that attack with life-changing injuries. But, the sense of responsibility that you have and the need, I suppose, to step up and be a leader and be there for people, I suppose, just keeps you going. But I do miss it at times. But I think actually that sense of the challenge around the environment, and particularly from a personal perspective, you probably don't realise until you leave it. And I think that's probably been the biggest thing having come to Scotland, is you realise just how different it is. My husband and I, we probably are far more part of the community here than we ever were in all of our lives in Northern Ireland, which we talk to each other about quite a lot around just that difference. That's just because the two operating environments are completely different, as much as there's many similarities. But
incredibly formative for you, as you say, in terms of your career and what's led you here. But you mentioned mentors and role models. Tell us about who your role models were, what they meant to you, how important were they to you?
Oh, massively important. There are probably, there are loads of people who have, I suppose, inspired me and been role models through my career. There's probably three that really stand out, and it's maybe not coincidence that they all happen to be women. So first would be Judith Gillespie. So Judith Gillespie is a former Deputy Chief Constable in Northern Ireland, but Judith mentored and supported me really from the outset of my career and at all levels, and actually just in days where it was really tough, or I was in posts that were really, really challenging, just having somebody to go to say, how do I deal with this? And not feeling judged and not feeling that you weren't good enough. She always just knew the right thing to say to sort of spur you on. But even her physical presence, particularly as she progressed through the organisation, as I say, before she finished as her deputy, knowing that she was there and knowing and hearing her being such a positive advocate of women in policing, hearing her challenge inappropriate things being said, continually representing the female perspective, because she was the only female in the senior executive team, I think just made me, I just found really important, and I think probably reinforced me. If she wasn't here, who else would be saying it? Which probably has been part of the reason maybe why I tend to be quite vocal around things, because I think I have a responsibility to speak up on behalf of the people that aren't able to be at the table and all those people who I have an obligation to represent. So Judith. Another one then would be Barbara Gray. So Barbara, currently an Assistant Commissioner within the Metropolitan Police Service, and Barbara is retiring in the very near future, but I first came into contact with Barbara when she arrived in Belfast, whenever I was the area commander in West Belfast. must have been back in around 2010. And I'd never worked directly with her, but always heard about this Barbara Gray. Who is this woman? And actually, I would say Barbara is a force to be reckoned with. I've never met anybody with the work ethic that she has. And the one thing I think that I've always taken from Barbara's leadership is the fact Barbara, as she has progressed through policing, has never lost the sense of who Barbara is. And she always makes time and talks to people at a really human level, and will always know or remember, well, you know, about if you've had a member of the family who's been unwell, or just take the time to see you as an individual as opposed to seeing you as a post or a role or a function. And I would still be in contact with Barbara. I'm hopefully seeing her next week, actually, when I'm in London. But yeah, so Barbara has been a really, really, and again, really vocal. And actually, I think just gave me that sense of stop caring about what other people think and just do the right thing. I think she's given me the courage of my convictions. I think watching her and seeing her, as well as learning a hell of a lot from her in terms of just her operational competence. And then the third one would be Maura Muldoon. Sadly, Maura passed away from cancer a number of years ago. Maura was a senior staff colleague in the PSNI, exceptionally passionate about issues to do with equality, diversity and inclusion. And actually Maura was the person that I remember going with Tara and Tracy to speak to whenever we were considering forming the Women in Policing Association in Northern Ireland. Back in 2007 we formed it. So in the early years, Maura was the head of equality and diversity, and we went to say, look, we'd like to do this. Maura never took no for an answer. She constantly rebelled against the constraints of the system and the very, I suppose when you look on it now, antiquated and traditional hierarchical male dominated policing culture that existed in Northern Ireland. And she just really didn't care. She didn't mind if people fell out with her. She wasn't there to win friends. She was there to do her job, and fundamentally was so entrenched on every equality of opportunity around people being equally represented. You know, she was a really strong gay woman within, you know, police. She was out, she was open, you know, and I just think her willingness to be a really key figurehead, and actually she ended up as my boss whenever I was a chief inspector. And again, even from that, I know she championed me at every opportunity. You know, she was one of these ones who was all constantly trying to push and thinking about how she exposed me to things that she knew. She probably believed in me more than I believed in myself, which is what I really needed at that time, particularly because I hit a number of blockers and just couldn't get through a process. But yeah, so those are three women that have just, I think, as well as obviously, you know, my mum and my dad have been really key figureheads. But in terms of my career, I think those three women, particularly through the years of sort of leadership, and whenever I was on that journey of, I think, just figuring out who I was and what I've done. And I think I'd probably be the first person to say that it's probably only in latter years that I've probably found the confidence to speak up and stamp my ground, and actually just not be I know it's hard to believe, but not, I can't think of the word now that I've said it all up, but not be a shrinking violet in terms of actually just sitting back and letting things happen around me. I have found my voice at long last.
And you know, and it is hard to believe, respectfully, ACC.
I'm an extreme introvert, Joanne. Actually, I am.
Because those of us who've had the opportunity to spend time with you, I think we would say all those things, those qualities, you know, that you've spoken about with Judith, with Maura, with Barbara, that we see them in you.
Absolutely. Oh, well, that's very nice of you to say.
It's really interesting to say that.
They've influenced me well then.
Yeah. And interesting, nice segue into my next question, because you spoke about blockers or barriers. And looking back, have there been key moments or milestones in your career that have kind of changed your path or changed your perspective?
Yeah, there have. I think the first thing that I would concede is that my biggest blocker and barrier through my career has been myself. I just don't rate myself. And I think that I don't know what it is. It's always been there. I think I might need counselling or something. And I don't say that flippantly. There is something I think that I need, because I just come in, I work hard every day. And I don't think there's anything about me that I'm not any more special than anybody else. You know, I've worked hard. I've taken opportunities when they have come. I think the things for me, I've been put in really difficult jobs over my career that I actually thought at a point in time, are they doing this deliberately to try and break me? And now that I'm older and more experienced in my career, and probably actually only over recent times, that then I have just wondered, actually, they've put me in really, really difficult places that have been horrendous, to be perfectly blunt, at the time. But actually, when I come out the other end of it, I think, oh, I actually really made a difference there. And actually, maybe I've been deliberately put in places in order to actually try and turn them around and make the difference. But it has probably come at a degree of a personal cost. And then I think, again, I try really hard not to associate, and I don't think policing's good at this. I try really hard to disassociate a sense of success with your rank or position within policing. I think we regard success as the fact you've attained promotion. And it's easy for me to say I don't think that's healthy sitting here as an ACC, but I really, I think, struggle with the fact. So I've taken the opportunities whenever they have presented themselves. It took me, I was actually having a conversation with a colleague who unfortunately didn't get through one of our recent processes, saying, keep going. I think I've got a mental block. I can't remember whether it took me 3 or 4 times to get my superintendent's process. I have a feeling it might have been 4, but I convinced myself it's 3. I think it might have been 4, but I dipped out so early in one of them. I think I've just discounted it. And actually at that point, I had been a chief inspector for 8 years at the time that I eventually got promoted to superintendent. And I think it was at the last time that I had failed before I was eventually successful, I got so angry. But rather than get angry at myself, I got angry at everybody and everything else. I fell out of love with the organisation. I got really angry at the fact I worked so blinking hard. You know, I'm working in some of the hardest, I was working in West Belfast at the time. Really, really difficult place, really challenging issues. I've said, even in terms of Impact in our team. And I felt like I had grieved for 2 years. And actually there was one day, it clearly had impact at home, because my husband actually just says, you need a really good kick up the arse. Do you know what's wrong with you? You've never failed at anything, and you just need to accept that you failed and get over yourself, because you're making everybody's life miserable, including your own. And actually he was right. And it's a fear of failure, I think, that probably is the bit, because there's that sense, and maybe it comes from that fact that, people keep telling you, and even close friends have told me, much to my frustration, oh, you were always going to be on that promotion list, because they needed a woman to be on it. And when people say things like that, as much as you believe, I've worked really hard, and I used to say, oh, I've been really lucky. And then I remember working with a coach before and them saying, you're not lucky. Just stop saying you were lucky. You've worked hard and you deserve to get to where you've got to. So I don't say I'm lucky anymore. I have worked hard. I've taken opportunities whenever they have presented themselves. But I think a lot of the barriers have existed because of cultural barriers. I think part of it is the fact that I still do it to this day. I will never ask for help because I see it as a weakness. And I think that has served to my detriment. Even most recently has probably served to my detriment. But I think part of that is you just need to, and for anybody who's listening, there is no shame and embarrassment in saying that actually there are some things you're not necessarily that good at and that you need help. But the only barrier, I think, for a lot of people, there are institutional barriers, there are procedural barriers. That's why Surian and our current chief, Joe Farrell, have said that we're institutionally discriminatory. But you have to call them out, you have to actually highlight them and, work through them. But what you need to be really clear about, I think, is that actually you need to stop putting barriers in your own way, because the only person holding you back is yourself.
And it sounds like, to me, you're describing that imposter thoughts that people have. I know not everybody loves that terminology, but Is that a barrier we put on ourselves, or does the environment contribute to that? And I'm thinking particularly for women, that need to go it alone, that need to prove yourself, that questioning of yourself.
I think it's a combination of both. I think a lot of it is self-induced, because whenever I am challenged, be it in a coaching environment or by anybody, or actually take the time, which I don't do often enough, to sort of take a step back and reflect, I have no evidence upon which to base any of my imposter thoughts or feelings. I am sitting as an ACC, and actually even when you read out the things I've responsible, I have a massive, really extensive portfolio of the best job in Police Scotland, I would have to say. But I have an absolutely brilliant portfolio that challenges me every single day. I've dealt with things throughout my career that have been really difficult, and I have come through the other end of it. And I think I'm all the better as a leader within policing and as an individual for the experiences that I have had. But I do think there's something culturally, yes, that people will question, people will have doubts. People will say, well, what's she achieved, or what's she done, or why would she get it? And, well, what service have they? And sure, what this whole flipping range of stuff. I think part of it is, again, back to that point, I can control how much volume I give those or not. And there is a bit, again, that actually people are entitled to their own opinions. And my sense is that actually I would like people to judge me on what they say and what I do. I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect. I make mistakes, probably more often than necessarily I would want to, but I believe I learn from them.
I like the point as well about what do you turn up and what do you turn down in terms of what you listen to, because that's important. But you mentioned the Women in Policing Association, and I wanted to ask you about that. So you co-founded the association in 2007 and you served as its chair until 2021. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the Women in Policing Association came about, and it probably stresses the importance of the need for the likes of the Women in Policing Conference. So it was the Senior Women in Policing Conference, as it was in the time. It must have been back in 2005 or 2006. It was actually as a direct consequence of attending one of those events for the first time that it became really apparent that there were support associations and networks within other police services, which didn't exist beyond the sort of statutory staff associations back in Northern Ireland at that time. And certainly in terms of the representation of women in early 2000s, women only made up 10% of the organisation in numbers terms, which was really low. And actually, particularly at the more senior levels, it was really, you didn't see senior women, and those visible role models were few and far between. And it was just as a consequence. I was an inspector at the time, and Tara Swan and Tracy McGeehan, we came back and said, look, we need to do something about this, just, to be able to share experiences, to be able to have those networks. And we went, spoke to Maura and said, we'd like to do this, got her back in, and slowly but surely then the Women in Policing Association was formed for both officers and staff colleagues, for our male colleagues as well, who were able, to be invited to be allies and support us within our work. And it grew from very little to the organisation that it was then whenever I finished as its chair in 2021. And yeah, I mean, I'd held a whole range of roles during the course of the association, and it really thrived. And it was interesting. I probably had shied away from playing I was happy to be the secretary, and I was happy to be the person that, did the doing, but not so much, again, back to that point of, I couldn't possibly take the position of being the chair and the spokesperson. And then over time, as I said, probably the more senior I became, and just appreciating, and that whether we liked it or not, organisationally, it was that bit in terms of culture, that there's that sense of, I suppose, understanding just how the informal politics of organisations work and how you navigate that. And yeah, we were an organisation, actually developed quite strong relationships with youth here in Scotland, and had the opportunity to build, which I think gave a really solid base, I think, and reassured us from the point of view that the issues in Northern Ireland weren't unique to us in Northern Ireland, and just that ability to share ideas. I think they are a necessary role at this point in time. I mean, we always used to talk about whenever we formed, the success, and the sign of success will be the fact that we're not needed in the future. But there just aren't enough women in the right roles able to speak and have their voices heard on a regular enough basis. And I just don't think there's that broader understanding of the reality of the issues of, be it sexism and misogyny. It's the same for racism, it's the same for homophobia, it's the same for disableism and everything else that I think then is just, that need to amplify the experiences to drive the culture change so that everybody can feel that they're having an equitable opportunity in terms of contributing towards policing. So, I loved it. I really enjoyed it. And I chose to step down probably for a couple of reasons. I chose to step down because of some personal challenges that I was experiencing at that time. But interestingly, somebody made a comment to me in the months, I think it was, before I'd taken the decision to say, oh, but you are the WPA, that's you. And I thought, that's actually probably really flattering, but it's not about me. It's about the mission. It's about women. It's about the overall role. This is not about my personal journey. And there was something lovely about actually being seen as somebody who was playing a really positive role, but it wasn't about Emma Bond. It was about women in policing. And I just thought at that stage, actually, it is time for me to step aside and for the association to have the opportunity to recalibrate and just, I suppose, reassert itself. Because I say, because of the things I was going through from a personal perspective, it might have been unhelpful for it to be directly associated with me. But I just thought Anna was also, I was a chief superintendent at that point. And again, back to the fact of this is not about seniority. It's not about position. This is actually about women and shouldn't simply be because of who you are that things start to change. And I also felt a degree of also that sense of, because I had the ability, because of my role and my nature, to make things happen, that potentially allowed the organisation to step back slightly and maybe abdicate its responsibilities to drive the work of its own accord. We were doing a whole lot of things, and because we got a really exceptional group of women on the committee, which was good, but actually we potentially were filling a space that maybe just, there were elements, I think, of what we were doing that potentially the organisation maybe could have been doing if we didn't do it, nobody else would. But it was just that sense of, well, how do we embed this as opposed to actually us enabling it, because actually I was in the fortunate position to be able to.
Yeah, because it's organisational, isn't it? And we'll talk about that in Police Scotland with Policing Together and your work in sex equality and tackling misogyny.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities there, some of the things you're talking about with the Scottish Women's Development Forum. You talked a little bit about, sexism and misogyny, and it brings me to the very public sex discrimination case that you were involved in against PSNI, a case that you ended up winning. You were quoted at the time as saying that taking this case had been necessary to address organisational culture that manifested itself in my unfair treatment. And that, as a leader in policing, it was important that you stood up against this unfairness to enable other women in policing, public service, and wider society who endured sexism and misogyny to have the courage to challenge it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I suppose it's probably important for me to say from the outset that I'm obviously really pleased that there was a unanimous, outcome in terms of the determination of the panel at my tribunal hearing. But I don't sit here with any degree of pleasure or triumphalism at the fact I had to go through an industrial tribunal. It was a very long, really challenging 3.5 years. And I was warned before I started it that it would take a lot from me. But unfortunately, it was the only option. I explored every other option possible, and it was the only option that I felt that I had. So I'm just somebody who stands up for doing the right thing. I don't necessarily need to say it because the finding of and the judgment is really clear around the fact that I wasn't treated right. The importance for me doing it for what I did is because we talk about policing as we work to a code of ethics. We talk about how important values are. Other people may not agree, but I was fundamentally not treated right. And if I didn't stand up for the fact that I hadn't been treated right, then I just felt that actually I would completely undermine my own personal narrative and values and beliefs, which are, you know, my values of honesty, integrity and selflessness. And actually, I think that sense of it did it for me, but it became really obvious during the course of the years and the run up to the public element, I suppose, of it, that actually it mattered to other people, the fact I had taken a stand, and even people beyond policing who, be it through, you know, family or friends, that feedback then comes back, particularly, I suppose, during the public stage of it, as to how many other people actually it mattered to. And I think that that probably at that point in time, particularly during the hearing, sort of reinforced to me the importance of what I'm doing. But I think there is just that sense of, I do feel a responsibility as a woman, but particularly as a senior female within policing, to be a role model and lead by example. My dad and my mum have always taught me do the right thing, and I fundamentally believe I did the right thing in the issues that led to the tribunal, in the fact I took the tribunal, and in the fact that, you know, I am where I am today. I just have to be true to my values. Otherwise, I just couldn't cope with being a fake. I can't tell lies. I really struggle to tell lies, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, and I think the thing for everybody is, I think it's very easy when you sit as an individual to not realise how many other people what you do matters to, and you just will never know that unless something happens to people, but actually what you do matters to other people.
I think your statement to the media says it all about your values, and that's why I wanted in particular to ask you that question, which leads on nicely to my next question, which is a bit of a two-parter. So we're delving into the topic of breaking barriers. That is the name of the podcast for International Women's Day. You talked a little bit about leadership. How do you think leadership contributes to fostering a supportive environment for all of our workforce, but also how would you describe your approach to leadership, and do you think it's evolved over the years?
I feel like I'm going through my deputies board again. Thanks for that. So how do I think? So yes, bottom line is leadership is really important, without a shadow of a doubt. If it wasn't for the fact that line managers and people, you through the course of my career took the time to encourage me, you know, this is not about, you know, it's not about nepotism and it's not about sponsorship. It was just that I think, oh, Emma, that was a good job, or actually, oh, you're good at that. I think just that recognition of, I suppose, the opportunities to progress, being encouraged to take opportunities for promotion or whatever it was, you know, being believed in to, you go into roles that if I'd have asked, I would never have chosen, but people pushing me, I suppose, beyond my own comfort zone. So, and it's not about senior leaders, you know, leaders exist at all levels. It's around even, you know, people as peers, saying, you know, having the conversation with you when you're having a difficult day, or saying, oh gosh, that was really good, or thanks for your help around that sense, I suppose, of I'm making a difference and what I do matters. So yeah, leadership's really important. I think my style, might be better off asking my commanders maybe what they think my style is like. That would be an interesting answer. But my style of leadership is probably one very much wedded around role modelling, sort of, you know, trying very hard not to have a say-do gap. I think it's a leadership style that doesn't forget the fact that I'm human and that I'm a person. I'm not defined by my position or, you know, what's on my shoulders or, you know, anything else, but I'm Emma, and first and foremost. And I suppose that's it. And I try really hard. I suppose I was told during my journey, and for anybody that hasn't done it and has time on their hands, I was told as part of my preparation probably for senior leadership to, well, what's my elevator statement? What's my elevator pitch around, well, what's my vision of leadership? And you should be able to state it in 6 words, apparently. So for somebody as verbose as I am, that's a real challenge. So mine is empowering people to do what matters. And I could talk for hours around actually what all of that means. I think I have an empowering style of leadership. I will by all means lean in, and sometimes I lean in, particularly if I'm new to something, in order to understand, to be able to step back. I'd probably need to understand things in order then to know what questions I need to ask in order to test progress against it. But I think my commanders, they maybe would argue that they've got too long a leash sometimes. But, I don't regard myself as a very needy individual, which sometimes, as I said, probably works against me because of the fact maybe I'm a wee bit too independent at times. But, people operate, they're well paid, they operate at senior levels. Even as a constable, you've got a real degree of autonomy around how you use the powers, a real degree of discretion, and you should be able to account for that and understand the parameters within which you operate. So I think that you operate within the realms of your responsibility, and if you don't, well then you're held to account. So I probably work from the basis of, as much as I would say I don't trust easy, again I think probably because of my upbringing, because you were taught you couldn't trust anybody. I do try really hard to trust people until they give me reason not to. But so I don't think I'm difficult to work for. I mean, I've asked people what my reputation is. I think I have a reputation of being firm but fair. I don't do lazy. I can't abide the fact that people, if I'm not saying we have a lot of these or that there are a lot of them, but people shouldn't come into organisations and work with a mission of doing as little as possible, particularly in policing. We're not here for us, we're here for the people, in our communities on the outside. And I think probably for me, in terms of my leadership, there's probably a need for me to understand the realities of frontline policing maybe more now than ever, because you become detached, and actually what we tend to hear probably at the executive level is quite far removed maybe from the realities of what people are facing. And back to the point of understanding what the barriers to people being able to do a good job for our communities is probably what I need to understand, because I'm fortunate enough to probably be in a position where I can help remove some of those barriers, but I need to know they're there and I need to know what they are.
Yeah, and I suppose, policing is rapidly changing as well, the way we police.
Totally, yeah.
Our communities, the rate of change of, say, technology, in the digital world as well, how we communicate. So it's interesting that you say that and that have that awareness and understanding as well. I want to ask you about your MBE. So you're a member of the Order of the British Empire, which has been awarded for your outstanding achievement in relation to service to the community. Can you tell me a little bit more about this honour? Yeah,
so it came as a massive shock, and I'll never forget the day I actually got the envelope. So we were at an event. It was an event actually that we were being presented to by our Chief Constable at the time, Sir George Hamilton. And at the end of the event, he came on and he says, Emma, could I have a word with you, please? And nobody likes being pulled to the side by their Chief Constable. And my first instinct when anybody pulls me is, oh God, what have I done now? So he pulled me into a side room and he handed me this brown envelope, and I went, what is this? He says, oh, I think it might be a speeding ticket or something. And I thought, oh no. But anyway, so I opened this envelope and he's standing there beside me. And I went and I read through it and it obviously tells me, and I'm like, what? Well, I was genuinely had absolutely no inclination, completely to it. And I said, but who nominated me? And he went, we did. And I went, what? And he says, yeah, we did. And he says, and actually, I'll not forget, because he said to me, now do you believe you're as good as we all believe you are? And I went, oh, really? So I know I still don't. But so I have never seen the specific, all I know is what is there. I've never seen the details of the citation. I think it was as a consequence of my work with the Women in Policing Association, but that's me putting 2 and 2 together. It might come up before, it could be 5. And it's something I suppose that I don't really promote. I mean, they've put it on my door outside here and I cringe every time I see it.
Only reason I know, because it's on your door.
I know. And actually, my husband, I don't use it because I think it's boastful. And I think, people think, get your woman with her letters after her name. And actually, instead, I should be really proud of it. And I should be really proud of the fact that, I'm probably doing those who recommended me a disservice by actually not using it. And more often, I'm immensely proud of it. I will never forget the days pre-COVID that I spent with my mum and dad in London and my husband going to Buckingham Palace. So wonderful. And actually, during that trip, my mum and dad hadn't been to London since their honeymoon 50 years previous. And we got to reenact their honeymoon photographs on the steps of Downing Street and at a Horse Guards parade, and they had the most. So I've got really special memories that as a result of actually that going to get me MBE that I would never have had if it wasn't for it. So for a whole lot of reasons, it's really special. And none of us do our job to get letters after our name or to get awards, but it's back to that bit of, what you do matters, and sometimes actually you get reminders of that through things like that. So yeah.
I like the fact that when you were being handed the envelope that you had gone through about 5 different scenarios of how you were getting this speeding ticket before you could actually believe that you were being honoured, and that it is an honour to have such an award bestowed upon you. So I do think you should.
We're going to talk about sex equality, tackling misogyny now. Long-term advocate for women. You spoke about your role in as the chair in Northern Ireland, but now in Police Scotland, you've got a key part to play in sex equality and tackling misogyny work stream. Tell us about the steps that have been taken to address institutional discrimination.
Yeah, so I have to say I feel immensely privileged, if not slightly daunted, I suppose, by the scale of the challenge to lead the sex equality, tackling misogyny work within Police Scotland, really ably supported, I have to say, by a lot of really enthusiastic and committed people, which is, I have to say, really reassuring. But I would be lying if I didn't say there's an awful lot of work to do. I think from my perspective, I've tried really hard with this, and actually was having conversations earlier on today. So we know that there are issues of sexism, misogyny felt across all parts of this organisation, and it's not unique to Police Scotland. So I don't think we can be hard on ourselves, but not persecute ourselves too much, because it's back to that point of, what we experience within policing is what is going on within society as a whole. So I'm not going to be able to change it alongside colleagues, anytime soon. If I can play a small part, well, then I think that's vitally important. And the work of SWDF and, other associations are vitally important in terms of supporting us do that. I think the bit that I think I'm finding a challenge is probably knowing where we start. There's also then, I think, the bit really conscious of, is it Dame Louise Casey's, report and work into the Met, really conscious around, that sense of initiative-itis and, wanting to make sure that what we do isn't just a whole series of random activities, but there's really coordinated effort and activity to make sure that the changes that we bring about are sustainable and that they're here for the long term and actually sustain way beyond my lifetime as an assistant chief constable in Scotland, post my retirement. And, actually what we're doing now really is the foundations of substantive change down the line. And I think I have a real degree of impatience, I think, is probably the bit that I'm struggling with, because I want to make the change, but I know I can't do it alone and I can't do it quickly. So it's trying to understand on the back of the survey, and a massive thanks to everybody who shared their insights to give us an understanding of the issues that people are facing on a daily basis, but trying to establish some degree of a baseline to figure out then how we know we're making a difference. And then also knowing what issues are happening is trying to get to the root cause to understand why they're happening, to then make sure that any of the action that we take makes a difference. So we're probably still It's probably proven slightly more difficult than I personally hoped or thought it would be. But to reassure people, there is a lot of work happening. There's work happening as part of business as usual within, people in development in terms of actually our whole approach to promotion processes, even to the likes of the basics of trying to make sure we've got mixed gender panels at every stage of processes, or that they are as diverse as they possibly can be for all of our processes, because actually it's just right and proper that they should be. It's around thinking about, the phasing of what are the opportunities for development. There've been conversations even at People Committee with the SPA this week about physical test requirements, for specialisms, all of those sorts of things. It's about, how do we do flexible working in a way that actually is in line with a 24/7 emergency service provider. So there's just so much, but there's a lot happening. There's the work obviously around empower hours, around inclusion moments, around this work that you are doing to amplify. We've got International Women's Day coming up. It's really good that we've got a number of women through our most recent chief superintendent's process in terms of that ongoing visibility. We've another female deputy coming into the executive team, all of those things alongside our male colleagues. I think there's still, though, a need for us to continue the conversation for people to realise it's an issue, which is part of the reason why we did the Y event back on the 12th of October with our male colleagues. Not to blame male colleagues, which I think quite often sometimes they can feel whenever we talk about sex equality and tackling misogyny, but just that acceptance by people that just because you haven't seen it and you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it's not happening. So it's to try and get away from a culture of denial around and just start to build that degree of, okay, well, let's make a difference. But there is a lot of work happening in professional standards around how we provide the support. I had a conversation earlier this morning with one of our colleagues, Chief Superintendent Davison, who's on the executive leadership programme, who's going to do some specific work around your grievance and procedures and actually how we change the way in which it's perceived, and that people can see it as something that actually adds value as opposed to something that's just been a really challenging process that nobody comes out of it happy quite often, or that it just is a wee bit of a tarnished reputation, to see how we make advances and changes of that. And I think the only thing that I would say around it is I can't do this on my own. And as much as there are a number of really keen and enthusiastic workstream leads and people across areas, it is the responsibility of absolutely everybody in this organisation to play their part, to call out, stand up, challenge things that are said, even if they're said in this alleged banter or jest. It's not to make the workplace sterile. It's not to make it a place that actually people don't enjoy coming to. But you just know what the line is in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. And it is that bit, thinking about, are you part of WhatsApp groups that you just don't think things are right? If you're still part of it, just leave it. There are things that you can do without needing to put yourself in a really difficult position of having to stand forward on your own. Just don't be a part of it, and when you feel able, then to stand out and call it out. And trying to do work with first line managers, and just in terms of that confidence of being clear as to what the boundaries are. So I'll do whatever I can to make sure that I fulfill the leadership responsibility that people expect me to, and that I feel that I have. But I need help. So if people have ideas or they have thoughts, please go to the internet page. We've asked people to share their photographs and their images, via Photo Voice of, what does culture in Police Scotland look or feel like to you through an image, because quite often a picture paints 1,000 words. I can't see how people experience this organisation. I can only see it how I experience it, but being able to see it literally through the lens of other people would be really beneficial. It would also really help us, I think, map and see what progress looks like over time. So yeah, just I suppose a bit of a call to people to come and be part of the journey with us. And you can do that in a very quiet way. You could do that in a very visible way, but yeah, be part of the solution as opposed to being part of the problem.
I think that's an important message. It's for everybody. It's in the big actions and the small actions, like you say, what are you involved in or what are you not involved in. But I think you make an interesting point about patience. So we know there's a need for patience because a lot of these things will take time to feed through, work through, and we'll see the changes, maybe years, maybe longer. But there's that urgency as well, isn't there? It's getting that balance between the two. I wanted to ask you about specifically around recruitment, retention, promotion, because you mentioned that some of the changes that have been made in that space, and our members would still reflect on the barriers that exist in that space. What do you think is perhaps most important to get right in relation to that aspect?
Oh, I think there's a range of things. I suppose from my perspective, I think I taught people who have worked with me will probably be sick of hearing me say this, but I have this thing that's in my head at the minute around some of what we do as an organisation. We tend to do almost in the cold. So things sort of land without us fertilizing the soil, I suppose, as an analogy, so that whenever it lands, it will germinate and it will start to grow. And I think that there's a bit, particularly around, recruitment in terms of thinking about that whole journey. So how does the activity undertaken by P&D and our really good recruitment teams, what's preceded that in terms of the engagement or activity at a local or divisional level to warm communities or key people up, or what are we doing within schools, years ahead to think about, policing as a career? What's the imagery that as an organisation we portray on a day and daily basis around what policing is and what the role of it is? And are we conscious enough sometimes around what it is we're portraying as the image of policing? I think there's something again around how we sell policing as a career, and it's interesting, and I'm not we do, we've got our national beat video and it's really good, but it's all around blue lights, it's the sirens, it's the razzmatazz of policing, and there's no doubt, there are elements of that sweep, but there's so much more to what policing is. And I suppose how do you in a snappy recruitment video or image, I suppose, portray the right thing? I think we just need to understand, are we targeted and focused enough? Are we laying the groundwork early enough? Are we, representing an image of Police Scotland that we want to? And actually, are we equipping and exploiting enough opportunities across all of the events and things that we do on a day and daily basis? I know it's stretching it, taking it to right to the days, but when I think about even, some of our big events, deployments, and the likes of the number of women, for example, that we have out in some of the bigger football days and various bits and pieces, some of them are really small numbers. And there's a whole range of reasons for that. But when you think about then how a broad demographic of a crowd going to a football game see Police Scotland, well, they're seeing potentially a predominantly male image, within their local community. So back to that point of how thoughtful are we being around some of that? I'm not saying that tokenism by any means, but I just think, again, in terms of how we promote the range of roles, I also think there's something, and the Chief talked about it recently, is recognising the fact, there are other routes into policing. We should not in any way undervalue the really vital role our police staff colleagues play in terms of policing. That women coming into the organisation through staff roles, also the really important role that we have in terms of potential volunteers and our specials. There is a sense of, again, because people maybe are uncertain around a 24/7 service, how do they balance those needs, potentially with caring responsibilities, potentially just around not sure about the nature of the work. I've spoken actually with my reverse mentor on occasions around the sense of actually try before you buy, that sense of being able to come in as a special to check and say, well, what was it like? And recognising, I think, on the back of Sarah Everard, and we have the Angelini report that came out yesterday, from the Wayne Couzens case and everything else, that we have to recognise there are things that have happened within society that maybe give the perception that policing's not a career that women think they will be welcome in. See him in terms of, the death of Stephen Lawrence, is the fact that actually, it's a career that potentially people from Black minority ethnic communities don't feel they see themselves in. At the event yesterday at closing of LGBT History Month, is that sense of, well, actually, what are we doing in terms of showing that we're an organisation receptive and welcoming of those from the LGBTQ+ community? So it's around that whole sense of what is what we're saying reflected in our actions and how we present Police Scotland. So, but every single member of the organisation has, be that staff member, be that volunteer, be that attested officer, is an advocate and should be an advocate for policing. And I just think we need to make the most of it and equip them to be able to represent policing in a way that we want to, but also check ourselves around, our working practices and how we do things. It's not about promising everybody flexible working, but it is about just making sure, and interestingly, we've had conversations about the conversations that happen pre the applications for flexible working that discourage people, or say, oh, I'm not sure, think about the impact on your colleagues if you were to do that, and then people don't put flexible working applications in. There's some of those things that act as deterrents, and people can't make a career within policing work with personal circumstances.
And I think I saw a recent paper from England and Wales that was talking about organisational inflexibility.
Yeah.
And for me, listening to our members and some of the experiences that they're going through, especially around retention, and when we're trying to recruit people in, we've seen those numbers drop this year for women recruits. It's concerning for us because we were at 50-50 in 2021, and now we're looking at about 26%. Now, there could be a number of factors around that, but it's starting really to concern us as a staff association. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so if that's Sarah Charman's report, I think you're talking about, I saw it, and actually it was a really interesting piece of research. I think there's a real need for us to understand what the reasons for that are. And I know whenever you reflect, particularly from our own perspective, we've recently had the pause in recruitment. You've got people, who are depending on a wage coming in, who potentially are, I've reflected earlier the challenges around the financial environment, cost of living. People maybe can't wait. We've heard things before around sometimes the length of time that it can take for people to get through a recruitment process. Maybe people just have other opportunities and options that mean that as much as they might want to stay within our process, it isn't swift enough to enable them to progress it. The last thing I think any of us want to see is a tailing away. I think the real thing for us will be to see if this is a sustained trend. If it is, then I think that gives us real cause for concern, and we need to absolutely be sitting around a table and figuring out with them what more can we do, and consulting with people outside of the organisation and asking those people who've maybe been in a pool or go into some of the, the key demographics of the groups not applying and ask him, why not? What's not appealing to us? I think we have reflected previously the fact it's a really competitive market out there, that policing has to try really hard to be seen as their employer of choice. People are getting, there are other industries that maybe pay more, don't require night shifts, don't require shift working, maybe do have a greater degree of flexibility. It's really challenging for us, again, in terms of changes in numbers, changes in our financial position, is our ability then, trying to strike that balance. We are a 24/7 service provider. Is how do we strike that balance then, whilst at the same time giving the degree of flexibility that potentially a significant number or proportion of our workforce might want, regardless of their gender or their circumstances. And it's that really difficult balancing act that obviously that we have. I don't think there's no single quick fix for us. I think we should not in any way get complacent that what we have is fit for purpose. I think we need to continually review and ask ourselves the questions and challenge ourselves. And also the question of, if people are coming in, what drew them to us, to capitalise then on that and inform some of the work that we do then to make sure that this isn't a sustained position, because policing will be the worst for it, and actually communities will be the worst, and society, for the fact that actually if we start to see a fall away in the number of women coming through.
In general terms, and you'll keep me right on this, because you're a great advocate of our fantastic youth volunteers and our special constables, in general terms, there's a greater diversity in that cohort, both in terms of gender diversity and really all types of diversity. Is there any learning that we can take from them, do you think?
I think there is that bit of just, people want to give back to their communities, but they don't want to have the responsibility of having to do it all the time. and that freedom, and they've got skills that they've developed, or it just works, or that ability to say when they work and dictate, probably in terms of particularly the likes of the specials, where they could say whether it suits them, and they've got that opportunity to do additional training or acquire additional skills. And I think there is a bit probably of recognising the fact there probably is something around, I know we talk about wanting that ability of policing being seen as, a lifelong career. And I absolutely agree with that. But there maybe is something alongside that of recognising, maybe we need to have a range of alternative options for people to come in to experience, to be part of the job, give what they want, and then maybe move on and experience something else. Again, I know it's been tried in other places and maybe hasn't worked in the same way that, or in the way that they would have wanted it to, but our route into policing is still the traditional. You come in, you do uniform policing, and then you specialise. As you referred to, Jenny, earlier, the policing issues that we're dealing with are changing and so vast and so complex. Actually, we've got people with a full range of skills that they acquire, be that through study or be that through other work and employment, that actually you could avail of if maybe there were other entry routes. So I think if we have to look at everything that we do to see, have we got mechanisms of people coming into the organisation that meets our needs but also capitalises on our desire to be as diverse and representative as we want to be. But I think there's also a bit of what we don't want is to bring people into the organisation under false pretences either. People need to be coming into policing with their eyes wide open, because it's a difficult job, and it's a job that demands an awful lot, emotionally, mentally, and from a practical perspective in terms of the impact on your daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look to the future and what that looks like, and the theme of International Women's Day is all about inspiring inclusion and the policing together. So that's our broader equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, really looks at that in greater detail. How is that shaping the future of policing in a way that will benefit our communities, do you think?
Oh, I think policing together undoubtedly it has a massive opportunity to shape how we will deliver policing to our communities. And I would ask, there should be no doubt around Police Scotland's level of ambition and commitment to making a substantive difference. I think if we can address the issues from an internal perspective around representation, if we can start to remove some of those institutional barriers that we talk about and challenges, if we can create a way where we are far better engaged with communities, and that cultural competence and awareness, I think, and just that appreciation of the fact that people experience life very different to each other, and that recognition that there is no one size fits all. And I think there is something for me, I'm really conscious that on occasions we try to compartmentalize things within policing because we are quite processy and it suits us. And I think there's just something for me about, I don't see, policing together, tackling sexism and misogyny, or dealing with burglary or whatever the case might be, necessarily to any different to, deal with the person, be that on the telephone, be that in a face-to-face contact, be that at the end of an email, and tailor your service to what they need from you and ask enough questions to understand what they need. And it shouldn't matter necessarily, whether they've a protected characteristic or what it is you're delivering the service that they need, that they deserve, to what they need and to what's within your gift to give. And I think sometimes we try and create bespoke processes. For me, it's just go out, do the best job that you can to deliver the best service that you can to whoever it is on the receiving end of that service. And if that means they need particular help or signposting or additional support, then give it. Whereas sometimes I think we look for the difference as opposed to polluting to see just what the needs are. And it's just about, it's not just about, but it is about service delivery. It's about, how do those people want to experience policing, and what's the best service that you can give?
Essentially, it's treating people as individuals, isn't it?
Absolutely,
and what their need is at that time and in that situation. And just a final question from us then. So as we celebrate International Women's Day, what advice would you offer to women who might be thinking about joining policing or aspiring to take up leadership roles in policing?
So to people aspiring to join policing is an absolutely amazing career. It is immensely rewarding. The opportunities that I have had, the experiences that I have on a day and daily basis to meet new people, to learn new things, I don't believe I would get in any other career. And what I would say is, if you don't know somebody within policing, or you don't know, just send an email to Police Scotland and say you're interested and ask for somebody to make contact with you, or stop an officer or somebody wearing a Police Scotland lanyard or uniform that you see in the street or whatever the case might be, and ask them what it's like. There is a bit of, come and ask questions, and we've got open days, that our contact command control centre run in terms of recruitment events. There are things happening in our divisions. We'll run events around specials recruitment, and look on our Twitter and social media pages for various events or opportunities to join. So please don't be deterred. And actually, if you come and you find out and you decide it's not for you, well then you're no worse off. Absolutely. And for those who are considering taking up leadership roles within Police Scotland, I suppose I would just say is, please don't doubt what you're capable of. I'm not saying it'll be easy, and you wouldn't want it to be easy, but don't doubt the ability. You may not have all of the skills, but you could certainly go and find them. There's a lot you can learn. There's a lot you can read. There's a lot of people across the organisation, male and female officers and staff, more than willing to coach and provide help and support and give you advice. Yeah, and the only person holding you back is yourself. I genuinely believe that. There are opportunities. And but prepare yourself for knockbacks. Prepare yourself for the fact you may not be successful. But if you want it enough, well then you'll go again. And there is that bit, that question you've always been posed, well, what makes you think you're resilient enough, to be a leader within policing? And you think, well, because I'm just determined and stubborn enough, probably, just not to let it beat me. I think it's just, my mum and dad always told me that just do your best, and I come in every day and I try and do my best. And if I progress, and that's progressing up as a consequence, and so be it. If I am an incredibly successful woman, because I'm not going to tell you what age I am, but I'm not yet 50. I'm healthy. I'm incredibly happy outside of work and inside of work. And I think that, I have a lot to be really thankful. And I think there's a lot of it is I don't regard my success. I'm not defined by who I am within policing to determine whether I am a successful individual or not. And I suppose that's the only thing that I would say is policing's a really rewarding career, but you need a healthy work-life balance. You need to be able to decompress. You need to look after yourself. It'll take a lot from you, and you just need to be able to give yourself that time out and to appreciate that actually, and it sounds really callous, it is a vocation and everything else, but at the same time it is a job, and your health's your wealth and everything else. You need to be fit and strong, and not strong physically, but strong emotionally and strong within yourself and your convictions and everything else to be good and to do it. But yeah, believe in yourself and you can do anything at all.
Fantastic message to finish on. ACC Bond, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today, and thank you for sharing your experiences with us.
To our listeners, let's take today's conversation as a call to action. Reflect on the importance of diversity and inclusion in leadership, support and promote initiatives that empower women in leadership positions. Together, we can make a difference, not just on International Women's Day, but every day.
Thank you for tuning in to Breaking Barriers. Join us next time as we continue to share stories that challenge the status quo and inspire change.
This has been a TwaBoldLassies production for the Scottish Women's Development Forum.